The past is a foreign country, and on its dinner tables lay dishes that would shock us today. Imagine turtle stew ladled from a giant shell or a platter of tiny songbirds on toast. These once-fashionable American meals stirred up controversy, captivated diners, and then vanished into history's shadows. Today, let's take a journey through 7 forgotten, controversial meals that Americans once ate, dishes now so unbelievable that they sound like tall tales. Green turtle soup, from delicacy to disappearance. A rich bowl of old-fashioned turtle soup, once a prestigious American delicacy. In the 1800s, turtle soup wasn't just food, it was an event. Huge turtle frolic parties were thrown where servants carried 3-foot-long turtle shells filled with hot soup to feed crowds. This dish was the delicacy of early America. No respectable cookbook lacked a recipe, and terrapin stew was considered the most prestigious dish of the 19th century. Everyone from working-class tavern-goers to presidents dined on turtle soup. In fact, Abraham Lincoln served terrapin at his inaugural ball. For a long stretch of American history, nothing could top a good turtle soup in popularity. But why don't we eat it now? By the mid-20th century, the turtle's fate turned. Overharvesting devastated turtle populations, and tastes changed. Green sea turtles, once the main ingredient, became scarce, so chefs turned to snapping turtles and other cousins, until those too grew rare. Conservation laws stepped in, and the idea of eating turtles started to feel wrong to newer generations. Within a few decades, turtle soup quietly disappeared from most menus, going from common fare to an almost unthinkable meal. Today, except for a few places, this once-cherished dish survives only in memories and dusty recipe books. Songbirds on toast, tiny delicacies turned illegal. In the Gilded Age, posh American restaurants served something that would make us gasp today: songbirds on toast. Picture a plate of tiny roasted birds, often bobolinks or other small wild birds known as reed birds, each no bigger than your thumb, curled up golden brown on a triangle of toast. In the 1880s, these were the height of gourmet dining. A journalist in 1882 described a Washington, D.C. cafe where a dozen fat little reed birds made up an ordinary meal for a luxury-loving customer. Diners would nibble these crispy little birds right down to the bones, savoring their rich taste. It was nostalgic decadence, even then, a tradition borrowed from European high society and embraced in America's finer eateries. Yet even in those days, there was unease. Hunters were massacring vast numbers of songbirds in marshes and fields to meet the demand. By the early 20th century, Americans' love affair with eating songbirds collided with a new love for the songbirds themselves. The idea of slaughtering birds that sang in our backyards felt increasingly cruel and unnecessary. In 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act made it unlawful to hunt, sell, or buy most wild birds in the U.S., effectively banning those once-coveted reed bird feasts. The dish faded away, living on only in old menus and baffling anecdotes. Possum and taters, a presidential feast forgotten. A 1909 banquet in Atlanta, where hundreds of guests, including the president-elect, awaited a dinner of possum and sweet potatoes. It's hard to imagine a steaming roast possum taking center stage at a fancy banquet, but in 1909, that's exactly what happened. In the Deep South, a possum baked with sweet potatoes was a beloved traditional dish in the 19th century. This humble Southern comfort food was so popular that when President-elect William Howard Taft visited Atlanta in 1909, local hosts served it to honor him. The banquet hall brimmed with excitement as 100 fat possums were cooked to crispy perfection. One contemporary account describes the grand moment. A waiter staggered under the weight of the choicest possum, properly garnished with rich golden Georgia yams, delivered to Taft's table, followed by another waiter bearing a flagon of persimmon beer. The crowd of 600 guests went wild for it. How did baked possum go from presidential plate to obscurity? Largely, changing attitudes and demographics. As the country urbanized and modernized through the 20th century, possum eating, associated with old-time rural life, fell out of favor. What was once nostalgic soul food began to seem outdated or unappetizing to those who didn't grow up with it. By the 1950s and 60s, fewer people hunted and cooked possum at home. There's also a yuck factor. A possum is a scavenging animal, and younger generations came to see it as a creature to avoid on the road, not to serve on a platter. Today, outside of a few rural pockets or historical reenactments, you'll rarely hear of anyone eating possum. It survives mostly in memory and folklore, a reminder that even a U.S. president once licked his lips at this controversial country dish, while today's Americans raise an eyebrow at the very idea. Horse meat steaks, when America took a bite. During World War II, American diners faced meat rationing. Beef was scarce and precious. Enter an unlikely substitute: horse meat. Yes, in the 1940s, eating horse wasn't just desperation or myth. It was common in many places. Butchers across the country hung out signs and shoppers lined up for cheaper protein. At roughly half the price of beef, horse meat found its way into stews, sausages, and steaks on the American home front. Republican opponents of President Truman even nicknamed him Horse Meat Harry, joking that under his watch, Americans had been reduced to eating pony burgers. The truth is, people literally ate it up without much fuss. Wartime makes the unthinkable quite thinkable. Yet, if you suggest a horse steak today, you'll likely get horrified stares. Cultural views shifted. Horses in America are seen as companions, noble animals, not dinner. By the late 20th century, a strong taboo had returned. State laws and public outcry shuttered the last horse slaughterhouses by 2007, effectively ending the practice. For many Americans now, the idea of eating a horse provokes the same revulsion as eating a pet dog. It's amazing to remember that just 2 or 3 generations ago, Grandma might have fried up horse chops and considered it perfectly normal. Fried brain sandwiches, from blue-collar treat to health scare. In certain Midwest diners of the early 20th century, you might have seen a hungry worker bite into a sandwich and proclaim, brains." This is not a zombie movie, but the real-life legacy of the fried brain sandwich, a once popular regional dish that is nearly extinct today. The sandwich was exactly what it sounds like: a slice of cow, breaded and deep-fried to crispy goodness, typically served on a bun with mustard, onions, and pickles. It originated in the stockyard towns along the Mississippi. Legend has it the dish started in East St. Louis, Illinois, where slaughterhouse workers didn't let any part of the animal go to waste. Frying up the brains was an economical, resourceful choice, and it turned out to be tasty comfort food for many. Through the mid-20th century, taverns in St. Louis, Missouri, and Evansville, Indiana were known for their brain sandwiches, attracting regular folks who grew up with that distinctive flavor and texture. So what happened? In a word, mad cow disease. In the 1990s, global fears of BSE, a deadly brain disease in cattle that could transmit to humans, dealt a death blow to the tradition. Scientists discovered that eating infected cow brain could cause a fatal illness in people, and suddenly brains were off the menu everywhere. The USDA banned cow brains from older cattle, and most restaurants dropped brain dishes overnight. A few stubborn establishments switched to pork brains, but even those are hard to source and carry a certain ick factor for outsiders. What was once a beloved working-class snack is now a rarity that younger generations often haven't even heard of. Lions, tigers, and dinner, exotic game on the menu. It sounds like fiction, a restaurant where you could order lion steak, hippopotamus ribs, or even elephant trunk. But mid-20th century America had a flair for the dramatic, and nowhere was this more evident than at certain eateries that served exotic wild game. One legendary example was Chicago's Café Bohemia, which from the 1930s to the 1980s delighted patrons with the most unusual menu in town. This place treated daring diners to a safari on a plate. You could start with antelope or beaver roast, then move on to braised African lion in Grand Marnier sauce or even Bengal tiger stew. On the seafood side, they offered whale steak or deep-sea turtle fillet for the truly adventurous. It was an era when the thrill of the exotic briefly outshone ethical or conservation concerns. Restaurants like this were novelties, catering to curiosity. Patrons would brag about having tasted bear meat or alligator, and the restaurants proudly hung taxidermy heads on the walls to prove it. Over time, however, public sentiment turned sharply against such practices. Serving many of these animals became highly controversial as awareness grew about endangered species and animal welfare. Killing a lion or tiger for dinner is unthinkable now. By the 1970s and 80s, exotic game menus faced protests and legal hurdles. Café Bohemia itself quietly closed in 1986, and with it died the era of openly serving lion and tiger cuisine. Modern Americans look back on those menus with a mix of fascination and disbelief. It feels surreal that everyday people once dined on zoo creatures for fun. Shark fin soup, a banned luxury in America. A bowl of shark fin soup, a once luxurious dish now largely vanished from American tables. Our final forgotten dish comes from the seas and carries perhaps the most poignant environmental controversy: shark fin soup. This soup was long considered a symbol of wealth and honor in Chinese cuisine, and for many years you could find it in Chinese restaurants in the US, especially in Chinatowns and at lavish wedding banquets. Clear, golden broth, fancy ingredients, and the prized shark fins sliced into it. The fins themselves are flavorless but provide a gelatinous, noodle-like texture that was highly valued. However, obtaining those fins involved a gruesome practice. Fishermen often cut the fins off live sharks and discarded the injured sharks back into the ocean, leading to a cruel death for the animal. As awareness grew, shark finning became one of the world's most decried food practices. In the US, the tide of opinion turned strongly against it. 12 states banned the sale of shark fins by the 2010s to help stop the slaughter. Finally, in 2022, a federal law banned buying or selling shark fins nationwide, closing the market completely. Today, shark fin soup has effectively disappeared in America, transformed from a status symbol into a culinary outlaw. Even in communities that once treasured it, most restaurants have voluntarily removed it from menus, offering alternatives like imitation shark fin made from gelatin or seafood. The dish that was so prestigious it was called one of the 4 treasures of Chinese imperial cuisine is now a dark memory of how luxury can drive species toward extinction. For many, this change is a point of pride, a controversial delicacy we chose to give up in favor of compassion and conservation. It serves as a hopeful reminder that food traditions can change when we decide our values matter more. History has a way of making us marvel. One generation's treat can be the next generation's taboo. These controversial meals from America's past, now mostly forgotten, show how our culture keeps evolving. If you found these stories fascinating, let us know. Which forgotten dish surprised you the most? Thank you for journeying with us down memory lane. If you enjoyed this trip through culinary history, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more intriguing tales. We'd love to have you along for the next story. Until then, happy reminiscing and bon appetit to the lessons of the past.